hit the go live button. There we go. Go
Little
live.
little tips and tricks here and there.
We've been doing this for years, by the way.
years. But I got sober halfway through, so I think the first part doesn't count.
You don't remember how you did it the first time.
Hi, everybody. Welcome.
There it is.
Please, if you could give us some feedback in the chat as to volume levels. Unfortunately, it's a little challenging getting everything configured. But I'm Ian. Today we are having a conversation with Mr. Tim Minear. Hi, Tim.
Hey, how are you, Ian?
We're doing great. How's things?
So good.
So,
oh my God. Oh my God. So good.
All right. Well, we appreciate you being here. Josh and Jack, you want to say hi?
Hi. Hello. I'm Jack. I think you guys mostly know me. I'm just here to have a good time.
Howdy, y'all. I'm Josh. I'm also here to have a good time.
And I, as ever, messed up the pinning there. So, Tim has donated his time here, and we're very grateful. We have asked for questions from you guys on Twitter, Patreon, Facebook, and YouTube, and we have collected some of those questions, some questions that Josh, Jack, and I have for Tim, and we're going to go through them. But we are watching the chat. So if you in the YouTube stream want to ask Tim a question, Jack and Josh are going to jump on that, and we'll go from there.
And just make sure you tag one of us in the question so we see it.
Yes. So use at Joshua Gosden or Jack. What's your screen name? Oh, Jack Cram.
Jack Cram. Simple.
Yeah, please. So make them stand out. So, hey Tim, reading through your IMDb credits is pretty intimidating. You've got you have an amazing career. There's tons of huge heavy hitters like X-Files, and speaking for myself, Lois and Clark.
Love it.
Angel, of course. But I'm wondering, sort of early on when you got started, what you considered your big break.
Well, I got into it very kind of ass backwards. I grew up in Whittier, California. Funnily enough, I don't know if you saw Fabelmans, but there's a scene where young Spielberg is gifted a 16mm camera. And they actually shot it in Monty's camera shop in my hometown in Whittier. So Spielberg got there, but like 40 years too late. So I grew up making Super 8 films in the 80s. And Monty's camera shop was on my paper route. So I just thought I'd mention that. But I lived in New Zealand for a year doing a show called High Tide with Rick Springfield, and George Siegel was in the first season. I got flown out there by the showrunner. I had never been on staff or anything like that. But I had written the very first, I guess my break was when I wrote these scripts for the Family Channel's Zorro. It was the first thing I ever wrote. And I wrote like 4 episodes of that. Then that showrunner got the show in New Zealand and flew me out there, and I wrote almost every episode, not knowing that wasn't possible.
A Mask of Zorro?
No, High Tide.
High Tide,
So
okay. Yeah.
He had run Zorro, and then which was in the 80s. And then in the 90s, I went to New Zealand and I wrote basically a script a week for this show, because there was no staff, right? There was no room, there was no staff. It was the showrunner and then me, this kid who had no idea how it worked. So they just put me up in an apartment, and I lived in Auckland, and every week I wrote an episode of this show. So, and then when I came back, I wrote this X-Files spec. But I'd already written 23 hours of produced TV that no one ever saw. So everybody thought that this X-Files spec was the first thing I ever wrote, which is not true. So I wrote that, and then a week later I was on Lois and Clark, and then a couple weeks after that, Chris Carter called me because he'd read my spec and then invited me to come work on that show. So maybe I think the X-Files you would have to say.
X-Files.
I guess Lois and Clark you would have to say was my actual break.
Yeah.
Because it was a network TV show, and it's the first time I was ever on a writing staff. Although that staff had no room. Like there was no writer's room. It was like there were some writers, and then there were the showrunners, and you'd go into their office and kind of pitch them. Here's 4 ideas, and then they'd say, "Oh, we like that one. Go write an outline." Then I'd go write an outline, and then I'd write a script, and they give me some notes, and they never rewrote me. And then they started having me rewrite the other producers on the show. I was a story editor, but they said, don't tell them, they'll get mad. So I did that. And then when I was on Lois and Clark when Chris offered me the X-Files.
Yeah.
The Lois and Clark people said, no, you can't. We have an option on you. I'm like, yeah, but it's the X-Files. I think I should go do that. And they're like, well, we've invested a lot of money in you. And so it's not personal, it's just business. And when they said no, and I said, well, you'll understand then when I tell you it's not personal, it's just business. When I'm going to pray to any God that will listen that this show gets canceled. And it did. And it had been picked up for 2 more years, but then it like got canceled. Then I did the X-Files, and it was really not fun.
Yeah, I remember you mentioned that when you came to the Reprise discussion.
Okay. Yeah.
And given that that's, I mean, one of the most notable. The thing I'm interested in is the variety of writers' rooms already that you've described, and sort of how that has informed your work on American Horror Story and 9/11 as a showrunner yourself, right? If I'm using that.
Well, I would say the thing that probably informs my style the most in running shows is what I do with Joss.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I was at the X-Files, I think I probably told you this story. That when I was at the X-Files, they picked me up for a 2nd season, and I said no. And I guess I was the first person to ever do that. Like they had let half the staff go in 13 episodes in, and then I was the only one that hung on. I did have a great time working with Vince Gilligan. Like we wrote an episode together, and he was fantastic. But at the end of that season, they're like, "No, we'd like to bring you back for another year, but we'd like you to write another script during the hiatus." I'm like, "Well, what if we did this? What if I didn't write another script during the hiatus? And what if I didn't come back? Like, what if we did that?"
So gangster.
And I had no place, I had no job offers or anything, but there was Ken Horton's assistant. I know I've told you this story. Ken Horton's assistant, who I used to hang out with, because I never really bonded with the guys at the X-Files, took me into a room, and she's like, "I want to show you something." And she put in an episode of Buffy. It was on video cassette.
Oh yeah, I remember. Yeah,
right. She put in Surprise, I think. And I'm just like, I don't know what this is. She's like, you should be working with Joss Whedon. I'm like, I don't know who that is. I don't know anything about cheerleaders. I didn't know about the show. And then I worked with Howard Gordon on another show after that. But I did go in and pitch like 3 Buffy ideas to Joss and David. And then Joss said that I was the angriest man he had ever met, and that he could not be in a room with me.
Whoa.
And that's what he told Howard Gordon. Howard's like, have you met yourself? And then sort of a few months later, then the Angel spinoff was happening. And Greenwald was like, hey, could I hire that Minear guy? Which is not how you pronounce my name.
Yeah, I remember that. Burned in my brain now.
He still calls me that. And he said, well, Josh said it's so long as I don't have to be in a room with him. But so Lois and Clark, to answer your question, was really the first show that I got on, and I've worked ever since. But I learned the most doing Angel. Most.
Without there's so many places I could go with all of that. God, that's fascinating. I don't want to put you in the position of throwing anyone under the bus, but the question, like, that wide variety of experiences, what specifically did you find unfun about working on the X-Files? Was it the way it was run, or the way they broke stories, or?
Yeah, it was just really hard. I think. Look, I was coming off of Lois and Clark, where I was the fair-haired boy. I was, basically my first real job. They never rewrote me, which I guess was unusual. And when the showrunner wanted to direct an episode, she specifically asked me to write the script for the one she was going to direct, so I could do no wrong over there.
Right.
And then I came to this place, and it was just different. There was Vince and John Scheiben and Frank Spotnitz, who were all fantastic guys. Like I have nothing bad to say about them. Mm-hmm. It's just that they had been through the wars together, and I felt like I was frozen out. Now, having now run many shows
Hmm.
and having frozen out many writers inadvertently, because what happens is the train the train is barreling down the tracks.
Sure.
You don't have time to nurture your staff really. It's like because you're laying down track in front of the train as it's moving.
Yeah.
So now I entirely understand what their position was when I was there. It just didn't it's that careful what you wish for thing, right? It's like
Yeah, completely understand.
the show I wrote a spec for, you never send your spec to the show that you spec. That's people do not get jobs that way.
Okay.
But I did. Although I did not send my spec to the X-Files. Chris Carter got a hold of it because David Duchovny got a hold of it, and he read it and he gave it to Chris. I was trying to get it to Howard Gordon the whole time, and he never fucking read the thing. In fact, he still needs to read it. But and then I've worked with Howard many times, but at that time I didn't really know him. I just knew someone who knew him. And so the fact that I got hired off this X-Files spec, which was the only, what I was told is you're going to have to write you're going to have to write 5 specs. You're going to have to write a bunch of specs, and eventually maybe someone will read one of your specs. It'll be at the bottom of a pile on their desk. Well, I wrote 1 spec, and 2 weeks later I had a job, so I don't know what they were talking about.
Wow.
And for those who may not know, can you just say real quick what a spec is?
Yeah, it means you write something on speculation. You're speculating that you don't suck, and that when people read it, they'll want to hire you. So back in those days, it's less so now. Now it's people write original pilots, or they'll submit a play. But back in the early 90s or mid 90s, when I was breaking in, what you would do is you would write a Sopranos, or you'd write an X-Files. Like, you would pick a show that's considered a marquee show that you think you understand, and you would write an episode of that show. The X-Files was kind of a great show to spec because it was not like The Sopranos, a completely continuing story.
Right.
Because there were standalone episodes. Like Buffy would be another one that you could spec, right? You'd do the Monster of the Week. You'd
Yeah, episodic versus serial.
Yeah, so that was the only show I watched.
X-Files or Sopranos?
Well, no, the X-Files at the time. That was the only one that I was familiar enough with to feel like, let me take a shot at that.
Well, yeah, the frequency at which you were talking about outputting content, I don't know when you would find time to watch anything.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't really.
So from your socials, I've noticed you're a big supporter of online fan content. People like myself, Liam Duke. I think fan communities are obviously super grateful, but also as someone who has some followers, I have 2 questions. What is it about fan content that engages your interest as a creator? And side question, how do you manage to not let the response to your work, either fawning or toxic, affect the work that you create now?
It's really hard. And by the way, when I was writing Lois and Clark, I'd go onto Usenet or the AOL posting boards. Like that's what kind of existed back then. And I would sometimes get into scrums with fans. In fact, there was this one poster, Sarah Trombley, who had very specific opinions about Angel. And I named the the evil priests in Pylea, the Covenant of the Trombley, sort of after her. Not as a dig so much as an homage. But what I look, something like what you do, of course I'm gonna like. First of all, it's very slick what you do. You're a wonderful writer.
Thank you.
The stuff that you put together is, obviously you take a lot of time and care with it. So I love, obviously, look, you're making something that is digging into something that maybe I bled a little bit for.
Yeah.
Right. And it's clear that you understand it, or you'll see things that even I didn't know was there. So your kind of content is, I would say, a cut above a lot of fan content. And then you're interested to see people react to what it is you do. Now, your question about the toxicity of it,
Yeah.
I have since had to pull the plug on social media in terms of my work, because the fandom has become so toxic.
Yeah. Well, I
So
mean,
toxic. And the factions and also what they expect and what they think is important. It's funny, I'll get the research back from the network and it's like, man, X or some of these online communities do not reflect at all what the mainstream audience is reacting to on something like a mainstream entertainment like 911, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
And it will cloud you, and it will affect what you do. You start writing to that. If you're writing to just get praise from the people who are being mean to you, it's a big mistake. And I have fallen into that trap on more than one occasion.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's obviously a drastically different scale, but even just with, I don't know what the channel's at right now, 60,000 subscribers, I hear voices in my head when I'm reviewing a new episode. If I have something to say that I think is going to be contentious to Joe Schmo 6969 on the channel, so you, for me, I find a day or two afterwards, I just stop engaging and move on to the next thing, make the next thing. Is that sort of like, I remember when you were visited with us the last time, you had just stopped doing Twitter altogether.
Yeah. Yes, I had. And I think I had probably just I deleted my Twitter handle and all that at that time. And then this year, I had been focusing mostly on Lone Star for the last 4 years. I was writing pretty much every episode of that with Rashad Rossini. We were writing a lot of the stuff together. And I really loved what I was doing on that show. There was like people paid less attention to it. And I could kind of not that I can't do whatever I want on 911. I absolutely can, and I always have. But I feel like some of the best episodes of TV that I've made in the last 10 years have been on Lone Star.
Mm-hmm.
But when I came back so I kind of left 911 a little bit creatively in the hands of others. And when we moved to ABC, I just came back and just took it over again. And I got really involved with reading fan sites and fandom. And that was a big mistake. Yeah. I don't think it hurt the quality of the 10 episodes that I had to make. Like, I did exactly what I wanted to do.
Well, how does it affect you?
It just makes you feel bad. I mean, and the other thing too is that I've always in my career engaged with people over the internet.
Sure.
Fans. I respond to them. I talk to them. I have conversations. I started finding that every private conversation I had with every fan ended up on X.
Huh.
And people were using like whatever like quote from some conversation we may have had to bludgeon another segment of fandom. Yeah. It's like, well, this is what Tim said, or and it's just it's much uglier now than I've ever seen it. I never thought it was ugly 20 years ago when I was doing genre stuff. Ever. I'm sure there are toxic elements. I know that there were a lot of people who were very upset about Willow's death, for instance. I remember that. But for the most part, it's been really fun back and forth with the consumers of what we make. I think that
we're just in an age where you have to be more choosy, I suppose.
Yeah. But now it's like and I also do understand on an emotional level that people feel an ownership to characters that maybe I've created, or and so if they want the story to go a certain way, like there's so many reasons why decisions are made in terms of where you're going to take a story. Yeah. It could be Gina Torres is going on her honeymoon, so I have to knock her out the first 5 minutes. Like there's a million reasons why you make decisions.
Sure.
About where you're going with a story. And you're not going to please everybody. But so yeah, people do feel a certain amount of ownership toward it. And I can appreciate the emotional. For some reason though, now people have just decided it's okay to like say things like, I hope you die. Fuck you. Just go ahead, search me on X, and what you will find is a plethora of people saying things like, fuck you, Tim Minear, I hope you rot in hell. And it's a little different.
Yeah, the decay of civility, especially in social spaces, is
It's
probably
ugly.
probably a different conversation.
So I unplugged from it this year, and I haven't read a thing since before the finale of 911 this season, and I'm much happier for it.
Yeah, that's definitely been my experience. The more I limit myself, the healthier I feel. Chase on YouTube asks, when you start a season of any show, say season 2 of Angel, can you explain the process? I've rephrased him a little bit here. Can you explain the process of maybe a head writer that says season of Darla and how the structure of the season develops? I think what they're asking is, can you describe how breaking a season works and sort of how a broad theme becomes 22 episodes?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I'm the best person to ask that question of, because I mostly just make it up as I go. Now, when we were doing, I've told you, I think I've told you this story before. When we were coming up with the Darla stuff for season 2,
Mhm.
she comes back in a box at the end of season 1, right?
Yes. Yeah,
Yes.
she does.
Yeah.
All right. So we had done that because we needed something to end on. We had no idea what it meant, right? And I just remember David and Josh, and yeah, you're Josh. David and Josh and I were walking in Santa Monica, just talking about, now what could this Darla thing mean? And I think there were some big moments that I think that we had figured out in advance.
Yeah.
Like she'd come back as human, but then Drusilla would show up and turn her into a vampire somewhere in the middle. And that was back when we had things called sweeps.
And
So
there's the fall.
I'm pretty sure that was sweeps. But so it's just some orange cones
Yeah.
that maybe you might lay out that you're working toward. But every episode is the same grind. It's a bar fight every time. What is this about? What does it mean? What's the best way into this story? What's the metaphor? The episode we're talking about today, Billy, I remember exactly. I was having dinner with David and Joss, and we were talking about this idea of, we bring back this Billy character, and he would have this touch that would bring out a primordial misogyny in his victims. And we thought, well, that could be interesting because, it's like Angel, what would that turn Angel into? And then I think it was Joss who said, who would be the most unlikely, interesting person for that to affect?
Interesting.
And we all just went, Wesley.
Yeah.
Like that's that, so originally it was like Angel's going to get touched by this guy and it's going to make him into a monster. And then we just thought, well, let's do the opposite.
Oh, interesting. Josh, you want to take the next one?
For sure. So this is a question from Kitsune Rokaku on Twitter. Here's hoping I pronounced that correctly. So Tim, what's the storyline that you would change if you had the chance from Angel or from anything that you've worked on? If there was one thing you go back in time and do differently.
There's fun. The thing that comes to my mind is the last thing I did. Do you know what I mean? Like last season on 911, I only had 10 episodes. And I did this kind of this Vertigo story with one of the characters, and it really needed 2 more episodes to kind of breathe and develop into something. And I kind of had to cram it all into like 2 episodes. 911 is a whole different animal because there's so much real estate taken up by, there's a case, and there might be 3 cases in an episode. And so then the personal stories have to stop. That's what I liked about what I did on Lone Stars. Sometimes I just didn't feel the need to have a case in every episode. I might make it a thriller. I've done it on 911 too. But in terms of, so that would be the first thing I'm thinking of. And probably, well, Cordelia turning into a goddess was not really my call.
Sure.
So I'll just go with stuff that I maybe had some power over. So I'm going to say that Eddie story from last year.
Well, we had a similar question, which I don't have the name in front of me. I apologize. Which was the times when something you thought it was going to go a particular way on the page, and then seeing it how it turned out being drastically different, which doesn't necessarily make you go, I wish that I had written that differently. But for instance, I remember the elevator sequence in Reprise. you had mentioned that you didn't include any external shots of the elevator going down into hell as part of that originally, and that got added after the fact.
Yeah.
So I suppose there's not just the bit that you write, but how that sort of gets processed through the
But look,
production.
yeah, what I would say is, I spend maybe even more time in post than I do writing. So I'm very hands-on in the editing room.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
So when you're asking, something might be different, it's not what I pictured it on the page. That's every fucking episode.
Right.
Like, why is the camera like, where's this? Where's this shot? Why can't I hear what they're saying? It's like, why did they shoot it like this? Now, there are also directors who bring a tremendous amount to something, but a lot of the time it's like, I haven't been able to direct in a long time because I'm so busy doing everything else. But if someone's gonna fuck up my script, it might as well just be me. You know what I mean?
Well, jumping ahead a little bit, one of the questions we had farther down was about. We were looking through your IMDb page. Assistant director on Platoon.
Hey, that's a lie. I was not an assistant director on Platoon. I was a production assistant.
Production assistant on Platoon. Okay.
Yeah, I was a production assistant on Platoon, but I did not go to the Philippines. I was the LA coordinator's production assistant, which meant that before everybody shipped out to shoot the movie, I was working in pre-production here in town, and I got all those I drove Willem Dafoe to the airport. Like, that was my job. And I went to like Oliver Stone and Bob Richardson, and like I gave them their airline tickets, and then I made sure that all those actors were there at LAX to make their flight. That's pretty much what I did. The best part of working on Platoon was the day I was in my office, and it was for a company called Hemdale, which is now, I think, defunct. And I was in my little office, and this very tall man came into the office and asked if he could borrow a pen. And I said yes. And he was using the pen, and I looked at him, and I realized something, and I excused myself. I went over to my boss and I said, Gene Hackman's in my office. And then I went back in, and that was pretty exciting.
Well, the angle I was going with that is when you talk about making 16 millimeter films when you were a kid. Super 8, excuse me. And then the multiple angles that you sort of started going into the business, it seems like, was writing just another way to break in? Like, what was your original ambition when you were younger?
My original ambition when I was younger was to be Steven Spielberg.
Oh, okay. As was many, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yes, he was very formative on my generation. Well, probably every generation at this point.
Yeah.
I wanted to be a director. I wanted to be a movie director. I thought that's what I would be. And then I took one film class at Cal State Long Beach, not unlike Mr. Spielberg. Come to think of it, yeah. I think he took a film class at Cal State Long Beach. Did not graduate. I took a film class there, and then I just started. Once I started adding sound to my little movies, because when you're 12 years old and you're making your Super 8 movies, yeah, there's sound, but mostly you're just learning how to shoot fight scenes, right? You're literally learning the language of film. It's like the way the original pioneers did with silent movies, right?
Yeah.
You learn the language of film by just making your films.
What works, what didn't, try again.
Yes. And then when I added dialogue, I started writing these little scripts. And then it turned out I had a facility for doing that. And yeah, it was a way to break in. I'm going to write a script so that I can direct. But then when they find out you can actually do that, they won't let you do anything else.
Being a writer.
Right. Which is why you have to end up running a show, because if you're a showrunner in TV, then now you're the boss. Right. Yeah. And then you can direct episodes and you can do whatever you want, except if you're constantly late on scripts, then you can never stop to go direct an episode, which is kind of what it's turned into in my life.
Yeah, I remember actually in one of the featurettes on the first Buffy season, I think Josh says something very similar, which is part of the reason that he started doing Buffy was to put himself through film school.
That's correct.
to be able to be a filmmaker. That's really interesting. It's interesting the multiple trajectories everyone seeks to get to a similar point, right?
Yeah, and I bet you a lot of people were like me, where you're like, this is going to be the stepping stone to the thing. Oh no, this is actually the thing.
This
And
is
by
the
the way,
thing. Yeah.
I mean, right now I'm working with Ted Griffin again. We did Terriers together. You know, he wrote Ocean's 11. He's a big screenwriter, right?
Hmm.
I'm quite sure I've written many, many more hours of produced entertainment than Ted has, because I write TV,
Right.
right? And
Yeah.
I've been on shows that have had seasons, many of them only one or abbreviated, but then there's the next one, right? So, I mean, I haven't even counted up how many hours of TV I've actually written that's been produced, but it's a butt ton.
Yeah. Um, Jack, you want to grab the next one?
Yeah, so this is from Lady Eternal on Patreon. Have you and your fellow writers, and it's a long one, but have you and your fellow writers on any of your series ever tossed around crack plot ideas in the writers' room when stalled out trying to write a script or plan an arc? If so, what kind? And do you have a favorite that you wish could have been made using the pretext of a character having a hallucination or fever dream of some kind? I think what they are getting at is, do you have any sort of writer's room go-tos when you get sort of stuck?
Um, no, is that what that question meant? What did that mean, crack?
To crack through. I'm reading it as to crack through a block.
Oh,
Or
well, she's not. She's really in the ballpark.
okay.
That's every episode. It's like, I mean, unless you have a very clear notion of what the next thing is,
Hmm.
often you are just spitballing and brainstorming and just thinking about, okay, the thing that we just did. If I'm the audience, what's the thing I want to see next? Who's the character I haven't serviced lately?
Hmm.
And what's an interesting story? And then it's always about, how do we come into this sideways, or how can, what's the most interesting, surprising approach to whatever concept we might come up with? Or, on Angel and Buffy, it was always, what's the Angel of it, what's the Buffy of it, right? How does this affect them? What does this say about them? And it doesn't mean that every episode, it's, sometimes, what does this say about Xander, if it's like a Xander focused episode? But on other shows, it might be a little bit different. It might be like, well, at the end of last season, when I wasn't around, they had Peter Krause and Angela Bassett getting on the Titanic. Guess I'm doing the Poseidon Adventure, right? So then it's like, how do I figure out 3 episodes of that?
So in terms of hopefully I'm not misreading. We weren't misreading Lady Eternal's question, but in terms of looking for tricks, what I hear is it's just brute force, do the work, throw as much against the wall as possible.
I would say the trick that I have relied on maybe the most is kind of a non-linear structure.
Okay.
Like if I can start in a moment of crisis that raises a question for the audience and then get back to that moment somewhere in the narrative, it's a really great way to tell a story, right?
Yeah.
It buys you so much. For instance, if you start with Mal getting shot in the gut and you have no idea how the fuck it happened, then you can have 3 pages of people sitting around having dinner. Like if you started that episode with that dinner scene, you'd be like, oh, are they done eating? It would just be so boring, right? But if you started it with, okay, this dinner's probably not going to end super amazing. It's probably not going to be great.
Yeah.
It just buys you a lot at the beginning. So that's a as I say to my writing staff, I am now going to reach into my bag of trick and pull out my one pony.
I love that.
I think that's called a fractured tease, opening with later on down the story and then going backwards. I like it.
I don't know if that's what it's called.
In medias res.
But I do it a lot. I do it a lot. In fact, in the season premiere last year of 911, I knew I was doing Poseidon Adventure, but I knew that I had a whole bunch of setup for a whole episode before it ever got there. So it starts with Angela Bassett being in therapy. And she's talking about, my husband's done a thing, although I'm not mad at him, but well, what did he do? He bought us tickets for a cruise. And what I haven't told him is that I'm terrified of boats. It's like, well, why? Well, did something happen to you? Yeah, yes, it did. And then it smash cuts to a 9-year-old version or like a 7-year-old version of Angela Bassett watching the ABC television premiere of The Poseidon Adventure. And she's like, this movie has just terrified me that my whole life. And then sort of at the end of this scene, he's like, well, take some extra Dramamine. I'm sure you'll be fine. And then it just like cuts into the future to this like listing cruise ship, and the camera goes through the water and like through some pipes, and it finds her and her husband like up to their necks in water. And originally in the script, the line was probably not the honeymoon you were expecting, right? And then she's oh, you'd be surprised. And so that's also promising the audience that we're going to get there.
Yeah.
Right. So those are tricks I use all the time. Flashing forward, flashing back, doing things non-linearly.
And if from the writing process, you're saying too that helps you get unstuck and sort of, because then you're by starting with sort of the climactic point, you're just then on the filling in connective tissue.
Yeah, and it's not always like the climactic point
or a high action high point. Yeah.
Yeah, or yeah. Yes, and I would say that it's much for me, it is much easier to write that kind of thing. Like I think I wrote Out of Gas in 2 days. I wrote it in 1 weekend, and I didn't rewrite it. It was like what I wrote was what we shot. But it was so easy to write. It was so easy to write because of the nonlinear structure of it.
Interesting.
Because it's completely emotional. Everything, every juxtaposition, while it might seem like a complicated puzzle, it's not at all. It's not at all, because you're juxtaposing the emotion, not the plot.
Yeah, I mean, the plot to that episode almost feels incidental to the relationships between the characters and sort of what it's saying about.
But that's the hardest thing too, right? To come up with the simple thing. But when you kind of land on something that's simple, something blew up, and we're not going to be able to breathe in a minute.
Right. Jack, you want to take the next one?
Yeah, so this comes from the live chat here on YouTube. This is from Marlene Wade, and Marlene asks, you've worked in many genres and TV show styles, from procedural, episodic, etc. What is your favorite genre and narrative style to work in? I myself, I checked out your IMDb, and I saw that you've done a lot of like supernatural and sort of more fantastical stuff that exists sort of outside of our real world. Are you sort of like drawn to that stuff, or was it just more it just landed with you and you got to do it? You just
Well, I mean, I'm a genre baby. I was going to cons,
Yeah, you mentioned Spielberg.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when I was 14, I would dress up as a Sandman from Logan's Run and go to SF conventions all over town with my fellow cosplayers, which was not even a phrase back then. So I've always been, science fiction, horror, and fantasy. In fact, I won the audience award for my Super 8 film in like 1981 when I was 16 at Comic-Con, at that time Comic-Con was a Comic-Con. Like
Right.
it was in a hotel or like the convention center, but not the one now. And it was a room full of people looking at comic books, and then there'd be like one screening room, and then Ray Bradbury was speaking. Like that's what it was. So I've always been a genre guy for sure, and I think I gravitated toward it when I broke into TV. Like I said, I wrote an X-Files spec, which is both a procedural and a speculative fiction. Sometimes it's a horror movie, sometimes it's science fiction. So that was like perfectly in my wheelhouse. But it's also a rom-com, and it's character, and do you know what I mean? It's like it's got all the stuff. I don't think what I'm doing now is any different than what I did on Angel or Firefly. Only now, instead of a spaceship, it's a fire station. Do you know what I mean? It's a found family. There's a lot of very similar elements, and kind of the philosophy of how you break a story is no different. But and genre is definitely my favorite though. Not just like crazy genre. I think genre that has some rules for its universe. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, one of the big I always feel like one of the big strengths of science fiction is the supernatural turning the prism on the perspective of your own life. That's sort of my whole shtick, right?
Yeah.
So, but using the epic,
metaphor.
yeah, the metaphor, the epic nature of the story as a way of examining something that is human and specific to, I would assume you or whoever is working on the story itself.
Yeah, it's like that's why we would always call whatever the magic ring or whatever that Angel had to get a hold of we just always called it the phlebotinum. It's analogous to Hitchcock's MacGuffin, right?
Right.
It's a thing that is just there to kind of like turn the story. It's just phlebotinum.
Yeah.
And then my favorite use of the term phlebotinum was when I was breaking an episode of Terriers with the staff, and we were pitching every idea in the form of a fake Sondheim song. So it was like, it's hot and it's monotonous. This plot is too phlebotomous. That kind of thing. That was super fun.
It almost seems to me too that in Angel there's a persistent rejection of the idea of the heroic quest. I don't know if that's something that you can speak to, but the whole idea of not taking the ring seriously, because it's not the point, I think shows up pretty regularly.
Well, I mean, a lot of times I would just kind of like wink at the audience in terms of like all that. The best example is, I think in Reprise, when Angel goes to get the glove, the
glove of Minigan, yeah,
the glove, and you got to get the ring, and like
or not
there's so
Minigan,
many crazy rules and things. And Angel at some point is just like, yeah, now you're just making it up.
Right.
And the guy got the glove at a yard sale in Covina and was using it as an oven mitt. Like all that stuff is so ridiculous, but the existential despair of that episode is the point of that episode.
Right.
This other stuff is you just have to write something that feels like there's a inner logic to it. Like in that Firefly episode when I have Wash say, divert the natsats to the blah, blah, blah. Everybody laughs at the end of that because they understand by the end of that exchange that if Wash does this thing, it's going to force somebody to have to stop where they're going and dig out the signal, which is exactly what you want when you're trying to get somebody to notice that you're stranded, right?
Yeah.
But every word they're saying is absolute gibberish, right? And I remember sitting there writing that right before we shot it. Like, I have to write a thing that sounds like a thing, but the point is to land this joke at the end of the scene, right?
Right.
So I wrote the scene that's virtually in pig Latin, and then I hand it to Alan. And of course, my script is late as usual. And he's looking at this thing and he is so pissed that he's like, it's like, how am I supposed to memorize this?
Yeah.
These aren't even words. And so what you're seeing on screen where he's so annoyed with Mal, he's really pissed at me.
I love it.
He was pissed.
Yeah, so many, I mean, specifically on Angel, because the whole mythic idea in the supernatural realm is easy to dig at. There seems to me so many points where the show just deliberately subverts common expectations of mythic storytelling. I mean, The Trial, as an example of the 3 trials, endure the pain and choose whose life and all that. And we can't help her. Which I think is one of the really fun things about that you guys did with that show was just constantly playing with common expectations of that kind of storytelling.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's always the goal, isn't it?
Yeah.
To do something that feels like a rhyme in the audience's consciousness, and then subverting it in some way.
Yeah. Josh, you want to grab the next one?
Sure. So, Tim from Starkery over on Patreon. What would you tell young Tim about being a screenwriter or director that maybe others also worry about? Or in other words, if you could go back and give young Tim one piece of advice short of buying Apple stock, what would it be?
It's the thing that probably I should tell old Tim, which is clean your office and stop procrastinating.
As someone generally, you know, who struggles with procrastination himself, and has been in a bit of a rut. What are your sort of techniques on a basic level for working and overcoming that, or is there just get back to
I
it?
gotta be honest. It's. I don't know that I've developed any skills in that area, because the thing that generally gets me past my procrastination is the studio's calling, the network's calling, production's calling, the actors are pissed. I need to fucking write this thing.
Yeah,
Right? They're going to shoot something. So because I don't really have a chance anymore to just create something, there are deadlines and there are realities. There are air dates.
yeah.
You know what I mean? So I have no advice for you except go run an actual show and then you'll see.
Well, I think yeah. I mean, there's obviously no comparison. It sounds ridiculous to even say anything like this, but the more I've done it, the more I sort of realize is like it's just getting back to it. But
100%.
you can't. I can't seem to shake the wishful thinking that there is some sort of magic bullet that someone's got a trick somewhere.
It's not. And for me, it's just like the whole process is just so awful and painful. And I just hate it until I don't. And once it's like working out. It's the same thing.
I was about to say, yeah, running.
100% the
No
same
one
thing.
wants
It's
to
like,
run until
I
20
don't want
minutes.
to do that. It's gonna be. I think I'm just gonna watch another YouTube fail video or whatever it is you're gonna do. By the way, I do that as research because that's the show I do. But it's the same thing. And then once you've done it, you're tired. You feel good. You feel like you accomplished something. I mean, everybody knows these things. So I don't think I have no actual advice. I mean, you already.
Yeah, like I said, it was wishful thinking to begin with. The
Well, I will say this.
Yeah.
Once I'm in it and once I kind of got ahead of steam, it can be kind of great.
Oh,
Right?
of course, yeah.
It's funny, the two episodes that we keep referring to, Reprise and Out of Gas, were both I wrote them both over a weekend. I generally wrote my Angel episodes over weekends because I'd put it off all week. I'd let it stew, and then I'd sit down on a Friday and I'm like, I'm gonna have this on Monday. But I remember writing Reprise and it just kind of came. I think, isn't Reprise the one that starts with the two guys who are reading instructions on how to do a satanic sacrifice? Like once I had that idea, I'm like, okay, this could be fine.
The IKEA
right?
Ector sacrifice. Yeah, I love
Yeah,
that bit
it's
with
like,
David Fury as one of the people
David
who's
Fury. Yes.
sacrificing.
So yeah, so that's kind of fun. And then this year when I wrote or last season when I wrote the first 911 for season 7, I think I stayed up probably 40 hours. I mean, I went like a day, a night, a day, a night, and then I was kind of done. Like I'm too old to still be doing that. But I was so exhausted at the end of that, I almost couldn't stand up. And then what I discovered was I had been bleeding internally while I was writing that script because I had an ulcer.
Whoa.
And so I was literally bleeding. I'd lost like half my hemoglobin or something.
Jesus.
But I just thought I was tired because I'm old. And plus I'd been up for days and I wrote this thing and but no, I had been bleeding internally. I ended up in the hospital for 3 days.
Well, I'm sure that's a question that anyone who has managed to churn content, for lack of that sounds like a pejorative way of describing it, but to do the work gets that question. My wife Lonnie and I saw Neil Gaiman speak, and he said that there is no way to do it. He said the only rule he sets for himself is he sits in front of the blank page. He's allowed to not write, but he's not allowed to do anything else. And I've tried that too. The key is allowed to not write, giving yourself permission so you're not forcing yourself, and all that resistance breaks down. And then you're just sort of like, well, I'm here. I may as well start typing some shit.
His thing about not being able to do anything else is, I think, the key. Like, that's kind of genius. Maybe I'll try that.
Yeah.
Because that's not what I do at all. I sit here and I try to write, and then I'm like, I think I need to watch a video. I think I need, you know what I mean? So yeah, it's really important that I watch the director's cuts of the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy. And then maybe maybe.
It's research, isn't it? It's research.
100%
Yeah.
it's research.
I
Yes.
have at some point I want to do a video about ADD. I have blockers installed on my computer that block me from going to websites that I can start on a particular schedule. But my experience is that at some point every tool breaks down, and it just gets back to like the tool doesn't matter if you don't pick it up, including just not writing anything at all. But anyway, Josh, you want to grab the next one?
Actually, I know we just got a question in chat, so I'll let Jack go first.
Go ahead, Jack.
And,
I'm sorry.
and then
Oh
I'll
yeah,
pick
this is from Herondale, an Angel specific question. Who was the hardest character to write lines for in Angel? If there was one, I guess.
Well, there really wasn't for me.
Oh, okay.
I don't mean to sound like that, but I mean,
No. Hey, if it's true, it's true.
Lauren was super easy.
Yeah.
I always wrote Angel as kind of a noir, taciturn guy, and often the butt of the joke. Wesley was pretty easy for me. I mean, originally in Somnambulist, it was Doyle, but like when I went back and turned it into Wesley, like it's not like he's doing Doyle's dialogue. I wrote the story with Wesley in it instead of Doyle.
You didn't struggle.
I think Gunn was maybe the hardest. Like I wrote this episode, this old gang of mine, which I think is just a travesty of an episode. And that was in that case, I will say sometimes what I find works is lying on the floor in a fetal position and weeping. Because I was doing that when I was writing that episode. Why am I trying to write Street Boys? I don't know I'm so stupid.
I hear you, brother. I hear you.
It's really hard. That was a really painful one to write. Really painful.
Josh?
All right, so I've got a question, Tim, and I've also got a quote that the user included with the questions. I'm going to read you the quote first. So, because this is from Kristen Keys on Patreon, and included a Hunter Thompson quote.
Oh, yes.
We are all alone, born alone, die alone, and in spite of true romance magazines, we shall all someday look back on our lives and see that, in spite of our company, we were alone the whole way. I do not say lonely, at least not all the time, but essentially and finally alone. This is what makes your self-respect so important, and I don't see how you can respect yourself if you must look in the hearts and minds of others for your happiness. So with that in mind, Kristen Keys would like to know what inspired the episode Out of Gas? And are you maybe a Hunter S. Thompson fan?
Well, that's funny because I often get, you look like Hunter S. Thompson. I often get that probably because every picture I have looks like this.
You do a little bit.
But I have not read Hunter S. Thompson, and I find that quote very interesting because that's virtually a quote from that episode. And I completely agree with that quote. Like, to me, it's just self-evidently obvious. So the inspiration for Out of Gas was, and it's not romantic, I'm sorry, it's just not. Joss at some point said, the next one you write should be about another ship with some brigands, some pirates who are like our characters, but they don't have a moral compass. Like that's what he pitched to me. And for like weeks, I just walked around going, what is that? Like that doesn't suggest anything to me. Is it because it's certainly not going to be Mirror Mirror, right? Which is like this great episode of Star Trek.
Oh yes.
Where evil Spock has a goatee. So I didn't know what it was going to be. And everyone knows this story too. Joss and I went to dinner as we often did. And we're sitting there trying to figure it out. What's the next episode? And he said to me, can it start with Mal being shot in the, gut shot, lying there, gut shot? And I went, yes, let's do that. Because I had nothing. That sounds great. I don't know what it means, but it sounds great. And then we just started talking like, well, maybe there can be like little flashbacks to the origins of how he put the crew together. So then all we did was we just talked about like, what's the most interesting way to meet each of these people who aren't Simon or River, but the actual original crew. But we came up with these scenes. I had a legal pad, and I was just like jotting down this stuff. And it's like, okay, so these are what's important. Now, what's the scaffolding that I can hang that on? And who shot him in the stomach, by the way? Can we figure that out? And then it's like, well, yeah, you did pitch this thing of these other brigands. What if he was shot by one of those brigands? And then it was just a matter of kind of reverse engineering a situation that just had those elements and nothing more. Right?
Do you start with bullets in all of these cases and then kind of work backwards from there, or whole scenes pop into your head? This sounds like bullets on a sheet to me to start
Those are
with.
bullets on a sheet. That's like we didn't write an outline and we didn't break the whole story.
Yeah.
I just basically had, and it was the same thing with Reprise too, because I had written and also Epiphany, because I wrote both those episodes. Right, they were back to back, and it was right before the Christmas break. I'm like, "Can I write the next one too?" And Joss is like, "Absolutely." And then, of course, Christmas break. I'm like, "Why did I say that?" And I got to write two of these things. But with me and Joss, it would normally be like there'd just be like, "Here's what the act break's going to be," and then there's going to be a set piece in an elevator, and it needs to end like this, and then I would just fill in the middle, right? And that was the inspiration for Out of Gas. Everything that's in it, all that kind of existential, that's just a reflection of me.
Sure.
And sort of what I find compelling. And then I'm always trying to inhabit the head of whatever character I'm writing, whether it's River going, "No, we're all going to freeze to death," and the preacher being frightened, and Wash wanting to be with his wife. And it was really writing Gina in that episode. That was easy because she was unconscious. Yeah. So I don't know if that answers that question.
No, definitely.
It does. And as a deep-seated, lifelong pathological Star Trek fan myself, now you've got me craving a mirror episode of Firefly.
Ooh.
Well, the reason I write television is probably City on the Edge of Forever. I think I've been trying to rewrite that episode since I was a kid. I mean, it ends so bleakly. I think that episode probably influenced my work on Angel kind of more than anything.
It's such a good
And I was a
episode.
huge Harlan
gorgeous.
fan.
Yeah.
I know that Harlan probably didn't really write that because I think Gene Roddenberry in the end wrote that teleplay.
Gene did up. Yeah, he steamrolled.
But when I won that award in 1981, I got to go to a chicken dinner where I got a check for $100 and a plaque. I still have the plaque. And Harlan Ellison was at that con. And I was very excited because I'm 16 years old. It's Harlan Ellison, right? And my friends had to wait outside. They wouldn't give seats to my friends who drove down to San Diego with me. I'd sent my film with all the original splices in a manila mailer. I sent it to San Diego. I'm like, I'm going to win this. I'm going to win this. I'm going to win this contest. And we drive down to San Diego from LA. It's a 3-hour drive. We get there. I'm like, I'm Tim Minear and my film's in the competition. And they're like, "Oh, your film didn't make it past the pre-judge panel." And I'm like, "What? This is outrageous." There were like films I'm 16. There's like USC student films, 16 millimeter, like, very slick productions. And the actual judges didn't see my film. I'm like, "Well, this is outrageous." And I paid an entrance fee and I sent I want my film. I want my film right now. Give it to me now because I'm going back to LA. And they're like, "Well, we can't do that. There's a process. It'll be mailed back to you." I'm like, "Well, no. If the judges didn't even see it, I'm taking it with me now." And then the person sitting next to that person goes, "Wait, did you say your name was Tim Minear?" I'm like, "Yes." Like, "Well, we screened your film earlier and it's won the audience award." And I'm like, "I'll be staying for the chicken dinner." So I go into this thing and I'm sitting there by myself, and people are getting prizes and things, and Harlan Ellison's there. So when they call me to go up there, I said, "I'd like to thank everyone who made this production possible." I'm 16. I want to thank my agent. Didn't have an agent. And I said, "But mostly I want to thank Harlan Ellison for being Harlan Ellison. He had nothing to do with this, but thank you, Harlan Ellison." So I sit down, and then this hand comes over my shoulder and steals the $100 check. And I look, it's Harlan Ellison, like a little imp, just like bouncing back to his seat. And he's got my check. And that got a big laugh. And then after the award, he brings it back to me and he's like, "Why did you say my name up there?" And I said, "Because you're surrounded by sycophants and fans and admirers, and I wanted to talk to you, but I didn't know how to approach you, so I thought this would get your attention." And he gives me back the $100. He goes, "Kid, you're going to do fine."
And he was right.
Wow.
But that episode of Star Trek was just a gigantic influence on me, and I'm sure many other TV writers, right? It's the ending, right? It's the ending.
It's so good.
It has to die.
It's the ending.
It has to die. Otherwise, Hitler will whatever.
Mhm.
Ah!
It's yeah. Well, not getting into that, but I wonder too if some of that intense cockiness is sort of required to early on, just like we've been talking about, do the work, get through the work, and kind of learn what you need to learn. I can't remember who the screenwriter was on Heathers, but I remember him talking about how he really didn't like the movie when
Michael Lehman?
I that sounds like familiar. He was he was writing it thinking, imagining in his head that Kubrick would be directing Heathers, you know, and Heathers is like this iconic, subversive,
Right.
all-time high school film now. But you know, he's telling the story about his that similar sort of like how dare you? This is not what I, you know, and as I just think it's interesting that maybe that's a necessary part of the gas that you need to get going.
Maybe it is. I know that one of the Epsteins, the guys who were credited, the brothers who were credited for Casablanca, a friend of mine told me that he ran into that to one of the writers, to one of the Epsteins at some kind of an event, like a Emmy party or something. And he's like, I'm sure you've heard this many times over the years, but Casablanca is my favorite movie, and I just want to thank you for Casablanca. And he sort of, you know, picked up his drink and went, "They fucked up my script." I was like, "Yeah, okay, fair enough."
That's interesting. Josh, you want the next one?
I think I've got it. Yeah.
All right.
So Tim, this is from Yazora and the Hearts on Twitter. So can you recall a story or a character that you really wanted to include an Angel, but just never found a way to do it or made the final cut?
Well, I mean, I kept pitching that we bring back Doyle, I think at some
Ooh.
point, and it just was not possible because of his problem.
Mhm.
And I mean, I'm sure there are other examples, but I can't, none are leaping to mind.
How did you want to bring Doyle back?
I don't remember.
Yeah.
It's a really long time ago.
Sure,
I
sure.
think I wanted to bring him back as the big bad at some point.
That would have been cool.
Yeah, but he just was not he couldn't work, and we
Yeah.
couldn't. It was too much of an insurance risk at that point.
Before we go any further, I just want to give you a chance. Are you good on time?
Yeah, no, I'm fine.
All right, keep going. In an interview, in an interview Julie Benz did recently on my friend Ian's Slayerfest '98 podcast, she mentioned that the Darla story in season 3 with the pregnancy ended up going partly the way it did because she had another show going and contract negotiations didn't work out. Part of the business, of course, but it did make me wonder what the original idea was for season 3 Darla Connor arc. Angel was way more so than Buffy big on split seasons, it felt like, where you have...
Was she talking about season 3 or season 2?
Season 3, the pregnancy story in season 3.
That's interesting.
And Darla stabbing herself in the alleyway. But Julie recently, in an interview with Ian, said that they were trying. She had another show going in Canada, and was flying between Angel and that, and they just couldn't get the contract negotiations to work, and that's why Darla ended up getting written off. Do you have any memory of that?
Well, I think that's not correct. Here's what I remember.
Okay.
And this is just how I remember it. Although I think Joss is given a different history. I remember we had done season 2, and I was the one writing all this Darla stuff, right? Like I was writing them as George and Martha, not Washington, but from Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. Just like this drunken old boozing couple that had been together and were like abusing each other. That's kind of how I saw them as they were drinking people.
Heavy on the Oedipus.
Yes, a lot of that. So I remember. So I'd written all this stuff in season 2, and then if I don't have this timeline wrong, didn't season 2 end with Pylea?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I remember being at dinner with Joss and David, and I remember this. I don't care what Joss says. I remember this. We were sitting there at dinner, and he's like, And I'm like, well, it's time to now like revisit this Darla thing because she's now disappeared out of the season. The whole thing was about her. It's like, how are we gonna end it? He's like, I'm bored with Darla. Let's what if we just do something completely unexpected and take everyone to Oz? I remember him saying that, right? And so it's like, really? That's what we're gonna do? We're gonna go to Oz? I'm glad we did. I had a lot of fun with it. But I also remember that like Julie wasn't available possibly, so that may have been another factor. That's why I was asking if it was season 2. Because I'm still trying to figure out why we did Pylea. I still can't quite remember.
No, I'm not necessarily. I think that what she was saying, and I'm not saying that you're privy to all the actors' contract negotiations, but at that time, but she was just mentioning that there were other plans for Darla and Connor.
Darla and Connor in season 3.
Yeah.
In season 3?
Season 3. That's where she commits suicide in the alleyway.
Yeah, I'm aware. I wrote it and I directed it.
Yeah.
It was my idea.
Nice.
No,
Very affecting scene, by the way.
What's that?
It's a very affecting scene, by the way. Gets me right
Thank you.
right in the
I
heart.
appreciate that. I remember screening the episode for Joss and him going, "How come I'm not feeling anything?" I'm like, "Because you're a monster."
What? That is a soulless thing to say. My God.
I think I fucking knocked it out of the park, quite frankly.
Yeah.
I think so too. So
that whole episode, top to bottom.
I think he may have changed his tune. I know he quite liked the way I staged the scene on top of that hotel with the steady cam and the 50-50 and all that. But her dying in that alley was, I mean, I know I had pitched early on that what if Darla's like lurking around outside the hotel and they're doing some construction and she just slips and falls on a shard of wood and she gets dusted and everyone just goes, "Did you hear something?" Oh, I guess not. And then they just go back to whatever the story was.
Somehow a worse
that
death
would've been hilarious.
than her death in the first season of Buffy.
Yeah, I just thought that would have been hilarious.
It would have been, yeah.
Yeah, but then I wouldn't have done Lullaby.
Josh, you want to grab the next one?
I got you, Ian. So for Mary Kate on Patreon, Tim, we would love to know about the process of writing Epiphany and specifically coming up with the line, "If nothing we do matters, then all that matters is what we do." And speaking for, I think, everybody in this chat right
Everybody.
now,
Yes.
that is definitely one of the standout lines in like fiction. Can you talk to us a little bit about Epiphany in that line?
Yeah. I could talk a little bit about that. So when I first wrote that script, like I said, I was writing 2 back to back. And I had just written this very existential episode reprise, right? With a lot of despair. And so I wanted the next one to be fun and funny. So I wrote the script and Joss read it and he was like, "It's very funny. You got to make it go deeper." Right. And so I went back and I gave it another pass to kind of bring out the emotion. And I remember, this is what I remember. Joss may remember this differently, but I remember sitting in David Greenwald's office with Joss, and we were talking about that, what Angel's Epiphany was. And I am quite certain that I pitched out that line. Here's why I remember I pitched out that line. Because I said, "Does this make sense?" But if you feel like nothing you do has any meaning, any value, that there's no higher, there's no God, there's no nothing. It's just you, and it's this, and once you're gone, you're like a light that goes out. So nothing you do has any meaning. That means that whatever it is, the thing that you're doing contains its own meaning. Like that's all that matters is the thing that you're doing, because there's nothing beyond that. And it's like, yeah, that sounds great. So I just wrote that line, right? And that's what I had in the scene. Joss never rewrote me except when I asked him to. Like I asked him to take a pass at the Buffy dialogue in Sanctuary because I felt very intimidated because I was an Angel writer. I'd never written Buffy, and I'm like, I don't know how to do this. And then I sort of tricked him because then I put his name on the script. Like it was Tim and Joss, right? And he came to me, he's like, "I've been rewriting everyone's scripts for years, and no one has ever done that. No one's ever like given me credit." I said, "Well, I mostly just wanted a script that had my name and then yours. I just top billing over you," which is kind of why I did it. But the reason I remember this is because this was the one time Joss took a pass at one of my scenes. what he added was, if there's no great prize, if there's no reward,
If there's
then
no great
glory.
glorious end, yeah.
Yeah. Like he added all this gack around the line, which I thought was unnecessary. So that's why I remember this, because it's like, because all I had was that line.
Yeah. Oh,
Angel,
okay.
yeah. Angel says, "If nothing we do matters, then all that matters is what we do."
Yeah.
That was the end of the line. And then Joss like added all this other blah blah to explain it, which I always just thought was like, you have to add that? You're kind of ruining my line. But I guess it worked out.
The other thing I love about that episode structure is that I think is really remarkable is that it's an anticlimax. Again, the whole episode being structured by sort of subverting expectations of mythical storytelling. The episode had perhaps the interaction with Darla and Angel at the end of the scene, but certainly it's
Kate, right? You talking about Kate?
No, I'm talking about in Reprise, not Epiphany.
Oh, right.
Yeah, to end on an anticlimax was really something I hadn't seen before. It's such a remarkable.
Yes, you had. Stop it. Here's the thing. Here, I'm going to put the lie to that right now.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
So when I was a kid, I don't know, 10 or 11, I was watching this TV show,
Sure.
right? And it was very dramatic, and there was a lot going on, and betrayals and just big heavy issues. And I'm like, how are they going to resolve this? And you get to the end of the episode and they left you hanging. It was like, but nothing was solved. It was Knots Landing. And I didn't understand that it was a soap opera. I did, my whole TV experience had been like, things get resolved at the end of the Brady Bunch. Like someone's going to lesson and they're going to hug. And, but so to me, I thought this was high art when really it was absolute trash.
Oh, you're talking about, soaps.
Yeah, it's Knots Landing.
Yeah.
Dallas, right? So all I'm saying is it may seem profound when you're watching Reprise. It's just a fucking soap opera, Ian. You know what I mean? It's a cliffhanger. Like, tune in next week.
No,
that's all.
Yeah. I do love the way though that you had that play into the theme of what he's actually learning, all the sound and fury signifying nothing.
Well, I pitched that. I pitched that to Joss. I'm like, well, he slept with Buffy and it made him evil. What if he sleeps with Darla and it makes him good? That's exactly how I did it.
Yeah. Well, the whole season's
ironic. I thought it was funny. That's why I did it. Funny.
Josh, you got the next one?
I sure do. So from War and Peaches on Patreon, Tim, we would love to hear some thoughts and insights about kind of the creative pluses and minuses working on an old network production model versus the new, having everything kind of plotted out beforehand. Basically 22 versus 13 episode seasons, selling a pilot versus having everything mapped out all up front.
Boy, I've just never had anything mapped out from up front. I just don't know what to tell you about that. I just never have, which I think is I think that's creatively the way to go. I mean, again, I'll just bring Lone Star back into it for a second. There was a whole story with Rob Lowe's character where it started off kind of funny, where he would like slug somebody, like he was hitting people a lot. It's because I didn't have any ideas. Like I'd get to the scene, I'm like, he really should hit the guy. It's like, but you just did that. I'm like, well, I'm gonna do it again. So like I did it like 3 or 4 times, and it turned into a whole story arc. Like it turned into a story of some rage that he had, and then I realized he'd lost a brother that he couldn't save, and this is where the rage was coming from, and that's why he's afraid of clowns. Like it was a whole thing. So it's you're letting the story tell you what it is a little bit. Also, it's just like, I know there are absolutely showrunners who sit down and have the whole thing figured out, but I'll tell you who didn't. Vince Gilligan did not have Breaking Bad completely figured out.
Wow.
He was just as much flying by the seat of his pants as anybody else. He told me that.
Wow.
That's good to know.
You have to understand. It's like you're just trying to make sure that, I mean, last year they were calling me packets, man, because everything was packets. Like if I can get the episode in my head, then I can write okay, what set can we shoot on Monday? Okay, so-and-so's not available. All right. Okay. I'm going to give you 8 pages to shoot on Monday, and it'll be out of the middle of a story that's not even written. It happens way more often than I care to admit.
I think a
Do you
lot.
think,
Oh, go ahead, Josh. I'm sorry.
do you think, Tim, do you think 13 episodes or 8 episodes or 10 episodes or whatever, do you think that's enough time to tell a good story?
I think it depends on the story. When I did Feud, I think it was 8 episodes. I could be wrong, but it was the story of the making of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. It was about Betty Davis and Joan Crawford. There was some vamping in these 8 episodes, right? Uh, so 8 episodes was plenty. But in that instance, you knew that, like, in reality, whoever died first, that's the end of the story. Once one of them dies, that's the end of the story. Or Ryan did, he's done a couple of these. He did The People versus OJ.
Mhm.
Like that's gonna have its own structure because everybody knows what that story is. He also did Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer thing that was such a huge hit on Netflix. It just depends on what the story is. When I first started, I pitched things that were like these limited series. Like, here's the story, and it would have kind of a natural ending. And everyone just looked at me like, well, we can't, that's not a TV show. Because you want a TV show to go on for years and years and years. You want to at least get 5 years out of it, and you want it to be open-ended. So a lot of the ideas that appealed to me were like too high concept to be continuing TV series. Most TV series that live on network TV are procedurals. Angel was a procedural.
Yeah.
Buffy in many ways was a procedural, right? X-Files is a procedural. Law and Order is a procedural. 911 is a procedural, I guess. Or sometimes it's an Irwin Allen disaster movie. But when I pitched these things, there was no place for them to live. Then something happened. And that something was Ryan Murphy making American Horror Story. Because if you think about it, the entire landscape changed after we did the second season of American Horror Story. Suddenly, you had these limited series where movie stars would come in and do their True Detective season because they weren't committing to 5 years of being on a show. They could come in and add their marquee value to a project, and then and Ryan even invented True Detective, if you think about it, because I remember that first year on Horror Story, I said, well, why aren't they moving out of the house? That's my first question. The haunted house movie, and in every haunted house movie, at some point the audience is like, why don't they just leave? So you have to keep contriving reasons that they don't leave, or you have to trap them, or there's just things you have to do. And I just said, I just don't think this can live on TV. And he goes, oh, yes, it can. At the end of the first season, you just kill everybody off. They're all dead, and then you come back next year and you do something else. Now, what we didn't know in the first year of Horror Story is if we were going to do season 2 in that house and have a new family in the house.
Mhm.
And then Ryan just had this genius notion that no, the thing that would continue on the show is that it would be a horror. It would be horror, different kinds of horror. And it would be like Orson Welles' Mercury Theater. Sarah Paulson would play something new this year.
Yeah.
Jessica Lange would play a different character. So there was a continuity in the cast. And then suddenly it became, ooh, what's Jessica Lange going to play this year? And that became another exciting element of it. But that was really the beginning of, the kind of the limited series craze, even though American Horror Story has turned out not to be a limited series because it's been on for fucking ever.
He really has.
I gotta ask because we received this question in some form or another multiple times. Excepting for the potential inaccuracies of the story of Angel's cancellation in the fandom, what I've read is that the arc of season 6 got crammed into the last 4 episodes. And I'm aware I read a quote from you that said you felt like Angel season 5 was in good hands and didn't feel a need to come back at that point. But the Circle of the maybe the Circle of the Blackthorn story at the end of that season. Quentin Tyler on Facebook asks, was that the original plan for the finale of Angel? And Ben Gillen asked, were there any plans for Angel post season 5 before the cancellation was announced? Maybe there wasn't an apocalypse.
I'm just the wrong person to ask.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
I had left to go do Firefly, and I came back in season 4, and the last interaction I had with Angel was the finale of season 4, because I had promised Brian Fuller that I would come run Wonderfalls.
Mm-hmm.
So I left when they started season 5, And so I'm not privy to anything about that. I mean, I do know that the thought going in was, I think that the network had made up its mind that it would be the last season.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure that that's what Joss or David necessarily wanted. But I think I think going into it, it was pretty well understood that the show was too expensive, which is why they shrunk it and put it all in Wolfram and Hart and, tried to make it cheaper to make. But so I don't have the answer.
Yeah, no worries. Josh?
Ian, I feel like you're the news anchor and I'm the weatherman. But so Tim, this is actually my question. The last time that you joined us for one of the hangouts when we were talking about Reprise, you mentioned very offhandedly your own sobriety journey, which kudos on that.
Thank you.
And as someone myself, I've been sober from alcohol for more than 5 years now.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I see threads in Angel's journey that speak to me very personally. And so I'm just curious to hear you talk a little bit more about how that influenced your writing of Angel's character and kind of his vampiric recovery from your own experience.
I mean, I'm sure it influenced it. I mean, on 911, Peter Krause's character is also a recovering alcoholic. So I mean, I've gone to that well a couple of times, but definitely it was the metaphor that I was using for Angel. It's just hard to have a metaphor like for a 240-year-old character, but that was the metaphor, recovery, and having to make amends, and that was really the metaphor.
I noticed that it pops up a lot in season 3 as well. It's the trying to make amends to someone who won't accept your amends.
Yeah. Yeah, I just did it again on 911 last season.
Yeah.
Well, a couple questions on Billy.
Oh yeah, Billy. Oh Billy.
Yeah.
Oh Billy.
Billy's kind of an unusual two-parter. His first appears end of That Vision thing with Roy from The Office. His name escapes me right now. Guarding him, sort of
yes,
unbelievable makeup.
David Denham, I think his name is.
David Denham. Thank you.
Yep.
And then comes back 4 episodes later, and you've got this sort of entrenched misogyny story with Lila saying, not all people, just men. He brings out the primordial misogyny. And also Jeffrey Bell is credited as co-writer on that. I just was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the genesis of the story, and was that the idea with Billy coming out of the flame early on?
I think if I recall, this is a long time ago.
Yeah.
If I recall, what we had talked about was kind of doing a demonic Kennedy family, right?
Oh, yeah.
So it's like basically it's like can't remember the name of the Kennedy cousin who was accused of murdering Martha Moxley, who was like a teenage girl. Very dark story. But he was a Kennedy cousin and never went to prison for it or anything. And so there was kind of a lot of bad behavior I don't want to say it's the Kennedys. That's not fair.
Sure, yeah.
That was the model, right? That was the model. And
powerful political family. Yeah.
So I think that may have been the genesis of it before we're like, hey, that actor was kind of good who played Billy. He was really kind of terrifying. So maybe we make it Billy. I think that may have been the genesis of it. And the primordial misogyny thing, I think that came from Joss. It was hugely controversial, that idea, when the episode aired on the internet. I'm sure that most people who were watching it at home on Wednesday night or whenever it aired, they were like, "Oh, that was interesting." Turned it off. But there was a lot of like primordial misogyny, and people got very upset about that. And then I kind of engaged with it a little bit online, which I probably should not have. But I'm like, no, men have to, they probably thought I was Jordan Peterson. It's like, men you have to teach men to be civilized. Right. Anyway, I got into a lot of trouble for saying things like that. I still stand by it, by the way. I mean, I'm at the age now, and also it's like I'm rich. It doesn't matter.
Well, if anything, the episode seems to be way ahead of its time. In terms of the idea of entrenched misogyny among people, including, I mean, the read that I have of the episode is sort of toxic culture bringing those things out in even good men like Wes.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's,
although there is an argument to be made, and Fred makes it at the end. She says, you know, it's not something in you, it's something that he did to you.
something done to something like done to you. I love his line at the end saying, "I don't know what kind of man I am right now," which I think speaks to
just what makes him decent.
Right. Yeah. To
right. So I mean, yeah, we were dealing with questions of masculinity, and you know, without being is misandry, is that the opposite of misogyny?
Yeah.
Yeah, but mostly it was just like, what's a cool plot where Wesley can turn into Jack Torrance?
Yeah,
that's really what it was about. It was like,
just,
how do you get to this set piece?
Let's wander into these.
And I wrote that. I mean, when I look back at it, I'm like, boy, I wonder if I would have gotten away with it now. I mean, I get a lot more notes now than I did for like language. And the only time I was ever forced to cut anything on Angel, when Angel slaps Darla. There's a jump cut in Reprise at the end where he throws her up against the wall. And I think he slaps her. They made me cut out they let me throw her through the glass doors, but he slaps her across the face.
Mm.
I mean, it was.
And that was a note the glass doors were fine with, but the slap.
The glass doors were fine, but they're like, you can't slap her and then kiss her. I mean, it was pretty extreme for like a show that you could say is a kid's show in some ways.
Yeah.
So I kind of get that, but like that, I just remember that stuff I wrote of him basically talking about her period. It's like so gross and dark.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, do you think you're special because you bleed once a month? I'll show you blood. It's like it's all in the episode.
Yeah.
So misogynist. It's like I cringe when I watch it. But that's
but that's part of. I think that speaks so well to the. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's something that men need to watch. Men need to see. Lonnie said something really nice about it.
Yeah, I wanted to just pass something along. My wife said that Lonnie mentioned about the episode. She said, when women experience misogyny, they're told they asked for it by what they were wearing, by being alone, by walking home, by asking what they need and what they deserve, by running for office. We're constantly gaslit about it. It's my fault I got attacked, not the fault of the man attacking me. To have men write this episode and openly acknowledge the reality of it felt very validating.
Oh, good.
I also really love that it showed how misogyny also hurts men, because it does. And that really rang.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it wasn't a stretch. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's not like we were saying anything hugely profound. It's just like that. Well, that's a thing. I was surprised that it got so much blowback when it first aired.
Interesting.
And I was getting blowback from women.
Yeah, I mean, I've been on other podcasts and still get blowback. Like in the discussion, there's blowback on the episode, and I'm sort of like.
But I also tried to keep it ambiguous in a weird way.
Yeah.
It's like it is a supernatural thing, and for sure the supernatural thing, like the metaphor, becomes a little overt in that episode.
Yeah.
But I did try to keep it a little bit ambiguous. The thing I remember the most about that episode is, and you will be shocked at how old this episode is. I got up at 5 a.m. because there was a scene that needed to be shot. The script had been shot, but I added the scene where Angel talks to the cab driver. I think I even shot that. So I was writing that scene, and I get a call from a friend in Tennessee who said the Pentagon's been hit. And I'm like, what are you talking about?
Oh.
It was literally the morning of 9/11 that I wrote the last scene of that episode.
Huh.
Wow.
Or the last scene that I would write for that episode.
Well, the ambiguity raises an interesting question, and by all means, don't answer this if you don't want to. But Josh,
Yeah, can you give us some more thoughts, or I guess if there was discussion in the writers' room about why was Angel immune at the end of the episode? Why didn't Billy affect Angel?
That's a good question. I tried to explain it in the scene.
Mhm.
I don't know that I have any more of an explanation
sure.
other than what he says in that. It's probably not a great explanation. Um, but if you just want the ugly truth, it's like I just needed a surprise in the scene. I just
Sure.
needed you to be like, oh shit, he's gonna do. Oh wait, he didn't turn evil. Oh, I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah.
And then I tried to like explain it later.
Ian, you've got a cool read on that though.
Oh well, we're not here to listen to my opinions.
Oh, I want to hear your opinion. Maybe
I'm sorry, did I throw you one under the bus?
Yes,
there?
you did, Jack.
What's your theory?
I would say I'm sorry, but I'm not.
Well, I think this falls. You were talking earlier about how fans feel some possession over these things after you've created them, and I think
Yeah, and it's perfectly valid.
yeah, so just acknowledging that from the opening. My reading of it, if you like, there's sort of the literal interpretation of in that scene. He says he's a vampire, the demon. Your explanation. I remember you did explain in that scene, sort of the tactile, real world explanation of him being a vampire. It just didn't have the same effect on him, and even Billy says that he's never done this to a vampire before. It'll be interesting to see what happens. But I think sort of from the perspective of the metaphor and the idea of entrenched misogyny, Angel's had a demon in him for years. And part of this, Wesley saying, I don't know what kind of man I am. That's a question that Angel has been grappling with.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're 100% right.
Since Buffy.
I mean, I guess the argument could be made that his entire raison d'etre is to be human and tame the demon that is still in him.
Yeah.
Like he is that metaphor writ large, and he's had a long time to kind of manage that. Maybe that does make sense. Actually, that's what I meant.
Perfect. That's how the video will go.
Right.
Jack, we're kind of wrapping up here. Just to give you a sense of the time. Jack, go ahead.
Yep. So where am I at? Oh yeah, sorry. So this is from Ed Banger. Do you miss anything from the landscape of television from the Angel days versus now? I feel like a lot of the fandom earns for the times of the 22 episode seasons because it really gives things more time. I sort of feel that way with some things myself. Sometimes things feel very like rushed, but then other times I feel like it makes shows more like efficient and yeah.
It depends on the show. Like I think Slow Horses is a great show that only I think has 6 episodes a season, but it's just like a great 6-hour thriller every season. And now I'm doing 18 episodes, which that actually feels about right in some ways. Because I know when we were doing 22, there would always be like The House Always Wins or The Shroud of Ramon. There'd just be some like although see, I'm pointing to other people's episodes and going, their episodes are filler.
Kind of filler, yeah.
Yeah.
But
they're
breather
filler.
episode. Breather episode.
Yes, it's a breather episode.
And sometimes we call them candy episodes too, the ones that are like fun and yeah.
But, no, the thing, yeah, I mean, I do look back very fondly on my time doing Angel. Sort of circling back to what we started this with, which is the fandom wasn't toxic back then. It was just it's just maybe just genre fans are different. I don't know. I mean, maybe the showrunners of Supernatural would have a different opinion on that because that show went so long that I'm sure that it had its moments of toxicity with the fans. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I've never ever had anything but warm interactions with any of my genre fans. Maybe it's
I've actually heard that
because
quite
I'm
a
a
lot.
genre fan, you know what I mean? Like because I am essentially one of them.
Yeah, I've heard James Masters say something similar. So yeah, you might be onto something there.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
just look at this. You know what I mean? Like we're just like four guys talking.
Yeah.
which we appreciate.
absolutely. Quick hits. Quick hits. Niche on Patreon asks, what character's death was the hardest for you to write, either personally or otherwise?
Well, it's never hard. Well, that's not exactly
I love that.
I've
now,
had,
now who's the monster?
I mean, well, they called me the Tim Reaper back then. They killed another one. I mean, Darla's death was in a way the easiest to write because I was into it. You know what I mean? Like it was operatic and I loved it.
Mm-hmm.
There have been there's other characters in other shows, like more long running things where you have to kind of tell an actor, I'm not firing you, but I'm killing you.
So there's sort of the professional aspect of
Yeah, that's
writing someone off.
to me, that's the hardest part.
Yeah.
It's not hard to write, you know. And then she stakes herself with a plank of wood. What's for
Well,
dinner?
if anything,
It's not-
the drama of it is partly what we're all here for.
Yeah,
But yeah,
I never. Yeah, writing is hard anyway. But when
Yeah.
you get to the big seminal moments, or Mal saying, you know, everybody dies alone or something like that, that stuff's easy to write because you're in it. You know what I mean?
yeah.
And it's never hard for me emotionally. I'm always like, oh, that's good.
Favorite shows from the 20s currently that you didn't work on, either finished or still running. So COVID era onwards, maybe something that is still airing that started before, or
Well, I love Slow Horses. I just mentioned that one. Anything that Sally Wainwright does. Loved she's English. She did Last Tango in Halifax, and she's fantastic. And what was her other show? Everyone watched it. She just did a final season after like 7 years. Oh, somebody out there knows. Check the chat.
I always lean on the hive mind for those kinds of details too.
Happy Town, right? Happy Valley.
Happy Valley. Happy Valley.
So good. Love her. She also did Gentleman Jack, which I enjoyed. But in the I mean, obviously Breaking Bad's the finest show ever made. And I absolutely adored David Lynch's Twin Peaks revival.
Oh, the new seasons. Yeah.
One season, tedious, impenetrable, dull, fantastic.
Yeah, the stuff that that's a different story. That makes me excited to get into it. If you weren't a writer slash director slash showrunner slash, what do you think you would be doing?
I have no skills, so that's a really hard question. I mean, I don't know. I'd probably end up being like a high school teacher or something. Although you have to go to college, so probably not.
Fair enough. If you were going to create your own online fan content channel, what show would you never get tired of talking about?
Wow, that's an interesting question. I mean, it probably not something I worked on. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, no problem. We'll go with Star Trek, City on the Edge of
Forever, yes.
Yeah.
I'll never get back to that, yeah.
After all the work that you've done, favorite part, writing, producing, directing? You've mentioned how much you hate the writing while you're writing until you don't hate the writing.
Although, I mean, but then a couple times it's been great. So, I mean, I would say directing, probably because the script is written, it's done, the hard part's done, and now you get to have a donut, and then somebody puts a chair under your ass, and you get to interact with other human beings. I have super fond memories of directing Darla, which was, I think, the first episode I directed.
I think so, yeah.
But I mean, that was so much fun. Now, I didn't direct Are You Now, but I was on the set for that. And I kind of directed it on the page, to be honest. But just being there while we were shooting it, I remember being at the Griffith Observatory for that scene, and David was there in this like
The Rebel Without a Cause outfit.
standing next to the statue of James Dean,
Yeah.
which is at the. I mean, that's not on camera, but that was like right there, and the observatory was behind him, and we shot until dawn, and it was like 70 degrees the whole night. It was a really hot summer, and I just have magical memories of that, and also shooting Darla and Pylea. Shooting Pylea was so much fun. So much fun. Amy Acker in that cave, and it was and the hilarious Charisma Carpenter in that princess outfit, jingling every time she moved. So good.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that mini arc. It's a lot of fun. I
It's
really
so
like
fun.
it.
So directing is where everything starts to come together, and you sort of get the rewards of the process, regardless.
Yes,
Right.
and also it's like I direct my stuff better than most people would direct it.
Sure.
I mean, I'm not saying like I'm a genius with the camera or something, but
No,
like
that makes
I
sense.
know when it's not right.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure I know when it's right, but I know when it's not right.
Right.
You know what I mean? And it's so I have a pretty good facility with like giving a note or whatever. It's just fun. It's just better because you're with people. You're with the crew, and you're with the cast.
And
you're
writing
you're
is
not,
giving.
not sitting here in your pajamas trying to get the damn scene figured out.
Writing is giving birth by yourself.
100%.
Yeah. All right. Last and most important question: Kirk, Picard, Janeway, Sisko, or Archer?
Kirk.
No hesitation. Okay.
Fair and valid. Yeah.
Tim, it's been a pleasure.
As always.
I'm incredibly honored and grateful. Thank you so much.
Well, no, I'm the honored and grateful one.
Jack, Josh, anything?
No, this was fun. Yeah, thanks heaps. We appreciate your time, and yeah.
I'm so sorry I fell asleep.
All good. We've all been there.
Like, you're asking an elderly man on a Saturday at 5 o'clock to not sleep.
Like I said, I slept through an entire stream. That was actually the one that you were in the chat for, I believe. Yeah, I slept through the entire thing. So
well, there you go. Well,
yeah,
payback.
But I think at that point, I was getting up at 5 a.m. my time for the stream, so kind of understandable.
Tim, lots of thank yous in the chat.
Yes.
So thank you everyone in the stream for joining us. In 2 weeks we'll be, I don't remember what Buffy episode we'll be watching and talking about. We are going to do a Billy rewatch before we do the rewatch for the Following Angel episode. That'll be in a month. And I think that's everything. So thank you everyone.